In their shot for global domination, Netflix has decided to try their hand at making a Texas Chainsaw installment. And I can't help but wonder, going into this movie, can the most dominant force in streaming give Leatherface's Chainsaw back its bite? Let's go ahead and cut into this one. Again, we are going back to 1974 and the very original in the connection with this film. We see the trials and tribulations of Sally Hardesty, and we have a fantastic narration of the opening of this one by the man himself, John Larroquette, the guy who did the original and the guy who did the remake. Let's see how this one turns out compared to those two. The story here is because Leatherface wore a mask during his crimes in 1974 that nobody really knew who he was. Thus, 50 years later almost, he's yet to be apprehended, and Sally Hardesty, who has become a Texas Ranger since everything that happened in the first movie, has been searching for him for nearly 50 years to no success. So we meet Lila and her sister Melody, who are traveling to Harlow, Texas with their friends Dante and his wife Ruth. We find out that Lila has had some trauma in her life due to being a survivor of a very well-known school shooting. Our core group has a run-in with a local at a gas station that is carrying a sizable gun. Later down the road, he gets a little aggressive with them on the road, passing them in a souped-up truck, and I couldn't help but think this is a similar setup to movies past where they introduced the bad guy to us. If you think back to that train wreck that was Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. It appears, though, that these kids have bought up pieces of Harlow, Texas in hopes of revitalizing it through new investors and new businesses. And it really needs it, too, because when we get to this town, it looks like Deadwood. Everything but tumbleweeds blowing across the street. Then they panic, because they see flying high from one of the buildings is a rebel flag, a Confederate flag, a Dixie flag, whatever you want to call it. They've got one hanging. And with a bus full of potential investors inbound, the last thing they want is their investors to see that. They decide to venture inside what is labeled as the Harlow Orphanage, and that's where they meet Virginia, who claims to be the owner of the building, and much to Dante's chagrin, he feels otherwise. This is also where we see that Virginia, inside this orphanage, is taking care of a mammoth of a human being that she describes as special. I wonder who that could be. Convinced that that's his property, Dante convinces the law to throw Virginia out, and when confronted with the idea of having to leave her home, she collapses due to a massive panic attack. This brute that she's been keeping care of picks her up, takes her in the back of the police van, and they head off to the hospital. Lila sees this as a curse and a bad omen, and she wants to leave town. She's not exactly excited about being all the way over there from her friends, and she feels like she's abandoning all the people that helped get her through the school shooting and all the tough times that came directly as a result of that. This old lady winds up dying in that police van, holding Leatherface's hand and asking him to be a good boy and to stay out of her room, which is an ominous thing that we find out just a little bit later what that means. He snaps. Leatherface loses it, and he kills the officer in the back of the van in a way that you have to see to believe. It's one of the most brutal things you can watch. Van ends up crashing into a combine, and this is where the monster is let loose. Now, Ruth is trapped in this van. She decides to tag along once the old lady has her panic attack so she can be there and report back to what's going on to Dante and the girls. Ruth is now trapped in there. The driver is somewhat incapacitated until Leatherface sees him actually show some signs of life, and then he's permanently incapacitated. She's able to send off a text to her friends, Ruth, of course, that the old lady died. After the wreck, she's not able to reach her phone, but she is able to send out a message on a CB when this whole thing is happening, because she sees that giant man through the rearview mirror cutting off someone's face, and she reports that over the CB. A shop owner hears it and then gets a call in to none other than Sally Hardesty, who's doing her own butchering in a barn, dimly lit barn somewhere. It's a hell of a way to spend your life. Now, Richter is the guy that these kids had a run-in at the gas station, and he proves to be a believable hero who seems to bond with Lila over shared trauma. He hears this woman has died, and then he corners Dante and snatches his keys. And he tells Dante, I'll give you your keys back, but you have to prove to me that the house that you just threw that woman out of that caused her death, you have to prove that house belongs to you. Go find me the deed. Of course, Dante can't find the deed. So the kids get the bright idea to go look in the house where the old woman lived and that old massive human being that she took care of lived. And we get all the fear of kids sneaking around an old house with rickety, aching footboards beneath their feet. It's as tense as it sounds. It's impressive that Leatherface gets there as quickly as he does, considering he doesn't drive. But he gets back there, and he dispatches a Dante before he goes and breaks through a wall in Virginia's bedroom. And lo and behold, Virginia didn't want him in there, not because she had magazines or anything he wasn't supposed to look at. She had something he wasn't ever supposed to find again in a chainsaw that she walled off. And Leatherface moves to a window to see all the investors celebrating in Harlow on a bus in the middle of the town, and he flies off into a rage. Killing everything in sight sounds just about right for him, and there is a neon target on the kids that he feels is responsible for Virginia's death. Now I pop for the scene where this blood-soaked monster wearing his mother figure's face boarded the party bus full of happy influencers, many of whom decided to point their cell phones at this guy approaching them with a chainsaw, with one of them assuring him if he tries anything funny, he'll make sure that he's canceled.
Hey, Ron, what are you doing? Try anything and you're canceled, bro.
It's a funny scene. They're live streaming as this massacre happens. You've got several people chiming in that it looks fake, or he looks like a guy I used to date. All sorts of crazy shit. Brutal bus massacre just before Sally Hardesty shows back up. I dug that they brought this character back and that she's a Texas Ranger, but she can't shoot to save her life. She misses everything. So there's half a dozen scenes of the climax of this movie that just lack basic human sense. And that's pretty par for the course for most horror movies. But why, oh why, if you are in a running vehicle that seems to be working and you have an opportunity to leave, do you not drive away from the chainsaw-wielding killer? I dug how Sally Hardesty put the onus on Lila as sort of burden of the survivor. Like everything that happens after this point is up to you. It's on you. It's your responsibility. If you don't take care of this guy, he'll haunt you forever.
Kirk, Pamela, Jerry, and Franklin.
And she recognizes that that's the case. That's why she feels the way she feels. If she'd have found him, all the people that had died up until that point would still be alive. Now, Leatherface looks gross, and he's pretty scary here. This cast is middle of the road. Not great, but not awful. I felt like this movie's a 5 out of 10. It's right there in the middle. It certainly is not one of the better Texas Chainsaw Massacres, but there's a lot worse out there as well. It's not going to age gracefully for me. I've seen this twice now, and even though there's a couple of parts that are tense, they're recycled parts that you've seen in better horror movies. There's nothing about this one that really stands out. I just really want these people to pick a timeline and stick to it. I want one director to sign for 4 or 5 movies and give us something that we can really look back on and say, that is tremendous. If they'd have done that with the remake that we got in 2003, I think we really could have had a lot of great Texas Chainsaw movies to enjoy for at least a decade after that. Here we are 19 years later, and it's just been a mixed bag. Leatherface deserves better. Just like that, we say goodbye to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We will get back together when we talk about rankings. That'll be coming up sooner rather than later. But we have to say goodbye to Texas and on to the next one. I don't know if it's going to be Woodsboro. I don't know where we're traveling, but we're going to talk about it. I'm Matthew Essex. This is Aging Gracefully. I appreciate you, and I'll see you on the other side.